right? So last time I made a farthingale and it almost made my computer explode. I'm not gonna lie, my CPU was not having it when trying to animate it. But I thought the next logical conclusion to that is to add even more complexity, to make my CPU cry even more, and to push the limits of what I can animate and do in CLO with my current hardware, that is. So we're gonna do a gown that we're gonna put on top of the farthingale and on top of a smock, and then we're gonna animate the whole thing and try to get it working. It's gonna be so many layers. It's gonna be way too many layers. I don't know if CLO can do it. This might be the last day I can use my PC. We'll see. But anyway, so we're doing a gown, and I thought it's only right we go right to the source, you know. Whoa. Please, there we go. I thought it's only right we go right to the source. So we're doing a gown of Eleonora de Toledo. And as the name implies, she is from Toledo, which is in Spain. And in Spain is where like the farthingales, aka the guardainfada, first started becoming a fashion. And she brought it out all the way to Italy, I think in Florence, because she was married to some like Medici. So the gown we're gonna be making is this one here, but we have these examples which didn't deteriorate as much, and they come from her court. It's rumored that she was the one that wore them, but it might be more likely that it was one of her mandem, one of her ladies, one of her homegirls. It was one of her ladies that wore it, because obviously at the court you're gonna have guests over, and you don't want like the people around your court to not be on fashion, you know. You have people coming over, and like the people working in your court are gonna embarrass you if they're not dripped down. So she probably imposed the style on everybody, or it was the new style. To be honest, I'm talking shit. It was the new style. Like the guardainfada was the new style. She was one of the originators. She was one of the OGs. So we're gonna pay homage. Obviously, you see the drip, you see the clothes. It's crazy style, crazy intricacy on the embroidery. This was the 1500s. This was like middle of the 16th century, and it's like around this time that things are starting to really push forward in fashion. Nothing really crazy about the look. It's just like a stays that's pretty like solid. It's pretty stiff. It's not super stiff like the ones we're gonna see in a bit later, but it's just a stay and a big petticoat, and that's it, sitting on top of a farthingale. So it shouldn't be too crazy. And part of the outfit, I'm also gonna make a smock or a shirt that's like similar to this, so it's like cool, and it's a nice outfit. I found some really nice illustrations of like some of the fits around the time, and you can see like all of them had the conical shape of the early farthingale, because that's how it was. Early on it was just like a cone like that. Early on it wasn't made with like steel or iron. It was more like, if you're rich, baleen. If not, it was made with like straw, dried straw, and it was just bundled up, and it created these like loops or hoops around the whole thing that kept the structure. But like I saw in like when we animated it in my last tutorial, like the movement is quite bouncy, and I feel like that's how it was with this as well, because they did starch the fabric to make it slightly thicker and slightly more dense, but you'd still get quite a lot of movement, and it wouldn't be as stiff as I think like later forms of the big crinolines and stuff like that. So I'm starting with the farthingale, and I was gonna work with the OBJ, but it always causes too much like friction issues, so I just ended up importing the actual garment instead, and then I froze it so it doesn't get in the way. And the very first thing we have to do is to work on the basic block of the stays. The stays is of course the part around the upper body. Now this is very important to get right and to get correct, because with fitting, if something doesn't fit right and you're towards the end of the project, when you've already added details, you already added all the different elements, changing the fit is very difficult, and it can kind of ruin everything. Because instead of just changing one or two things or one or two angles, now you have to change everything that is related to it. And that's kind of how fitting works. Everything works with a kind of like chain reaction. So you always have to keep mindful and kind of keep it as controlled as possible. So that's why you want to get the fit correct before you move on. So that's the most important thing. Another very, very important thing when working with historical garments and you're trying to represent a historical garment in the most accurate way possible, you have to stay true to the cutting techniques, so the pattern cutting techniques that were used in that time. Of course, I could make this gown using more modern techniques, like using darts in the body and things of that nature, that would create a similar silhouette, and to an untrained eye, it would look correct. But the problem is, like, you're never going to be able to capture the accuracy and like the detail of how something fit using the wrong technique. So here you see me, I'm doing this cut, and this was very, very kind of representative of a way to cut garments during the time. The shaping of the garment came mostly from the side seam in this gown, for example. The center front and center back are straight, so we don't have a situation that we do see in some garments where there's shaping around along the center front or the center back. So once I'm done kind of getting the shape I want, I am now going to start making the stays look like my reference. And this is always important, to keep the block as a block for as long as possible on work and work towards getting the fit and silhouette correct. And then once it fits correctly and you get the silhouette you want, then you would draw on the lines that you would want, whether they're style lines, whether they're actual cutouts in the garment. You first kind of want to just draw them out, make sure they have good proportions, make sure they sit well, and then you can kind of cut those pieces out, simulate again, just to make sure that everything is still held in place correctly. And that's kind of how you would go about it. You never start working with the final shape to begin with, because it just makes, again, fitting much more difficult. For something simple like this, you could probably make it work, but when you get more and more complex, it just becomes like a bad workflow. It really becomes a bad workflow. And then just finally for this part, we're gonna add the smock underneath. We, at this point, just because we're working with these layers, we don't want to make the bodies without having the layer that will sit beneath it, because then when we introduce it later, it might cause issues, and we might get the fit a little bit wrong because we didn't account for anything to be underneath that. So we're gonna add the smock now, and I'm just adding it from a different project that I did earlier. I think I did a tutorial on it as well. And yeah, we're adding the smock, and I just made it much shorter than it usually is, because I didn't want to tuck it into the farthingale. It doesn't need to. In reality, it would be, but we're always replicating reality and trying to create the illusion of reality more so than replicating reality accurately. So yeah, you just want to make it shorter, just so that it doesn't tuck into the farthingale, because then it just creates more kind of computation for Claude to do, and it just slows things down. And next we're making the petticoat, now that everything is set on the stays. So for the petticoat, we're just starting from the farthingale just to get the very similar type of A-line silhouette. And we're just gonna stretch it out just a little bit on the sides, just to add a little bit more volume so it sits on top of it. It doesn't need to stretch to sit on top of it. The thing about this we're gonna do is we're gonna simplify it a little bit. In reality, this would have been pleated all around, and the types of pleats you would see in these types of petticoats differ. But for just simplicity's sake, we're just gonna do gathering for now. And there was only going to be one pleat on the front, just because that makes it look much closer to the reference, and it overall looks nicer and gives the front a really nice flat finish. And the difficult part with this is just making sure that the front sits nicely and flat. And the way to do that is to make sure that where we sew it onto the stays, it matches the stays almost perfectly. So we're going to do this thing that in fashion design we kind of call it following the fabric, or following what the fabric tells you to do. And that's kind of working within the bounds of what the fabric will allow. So what we're going to do is we're going to be sewing around the whole waist except for the front part. The front part we're just going to let it fall and see how it falls and where it wants to go. And based off that, we're just going to make changes to the pattern to make sure that it sits correctly and it kind of matches the stays one to one. So then when we sew it onto the stays, we know it's just going to fall flat and it's not going to cause any issues because we kind of controlled everything around there. And once it sits nicely, I think this is the point where if we don't like our volume, we can always make more changes to the volume, as long as we only make it on the center back seam and on the side seams. We don't want to touch the front at this point just because we made it fit perfectly onto the stays, but everything else at the side seam and at the center back should not really affect that too much on the front. And then I just cut the front pieces one time just so it's easier for me to make the pleat, and it's just a simple pleat, kind of forward facing, so it just controls the volume a lot nicer, and I think it helps a little bit more than just a simple gather to make everything fall on the front flat. And then we're gonna just set the train on the back of the petticoat. I just use some pins and kind of pull it around just so it sits nicely and flat. Nothing really crazy. And finally, we're just gonna add these lines for the embroidery panels, because in our reference, if you recall, we have these the embroidery on the front and the back, and this is much easier for texturing's sake to be as a separate panel than if we had to just do it on the same panel. So I'm just separating these just so it gives me the opportunity to work much easier when making the embroidery. And we do the same with the embroidery panels on the petticoat as well, because we have embroidery there as well as the stays. So that's pretty much it in CLO. There's not too much to it. It's actually quite a simple gown overall. Really the keys are in shaping the stays and in getting the volume correct and sitting right on the petticoat. But this is good because we get to see a very kind of basic gown at the time, so we can kind of see kind of the techniques that were the cutting techniques that were used at the time and how to replicate them in CLO. So next we'll be texturing this, so we create a nice texture before we animate, and I'm gonna make the texture in Substance Painter just because it's honestly very powerful program. So you can do it in Blender as well. I just don't use Blender for texturing. I usually do it in Substance Painter. So I'm gonna take it there, give it a texture, and then we're gonna animate this. So I just took this to Substance Painter to do some texturing, and here I'm just developing the main fabric. I wanted to get a nice silk looking or satin looking type of fabric. I wanted to get the shine right, even though I don't know how much the shine is gonna come out in CLO 3D, just because I don't think it has a sheen channel like Substance Painter does. But yeah, I just wanted to get the fabrics right. Just wanted to make it look pretty realistic. And you can see here like the embroidery panels and what the point of having the embroidery panels was, just to kind of separate from the underlying fabric. And when we throw on a texture that has an opacity map, then we can see it sitting on top of the fabric just as embroidery would, and we can also see the fabric underneath. I don't show here like the way I developed the embroidery because I don't want to spend too much time on the Substance Painter stuff. It's a little bit out of the scope of this video, but yeah, this is pretty much the work I did in Substance Painter. And then finally I'm setting up everything for the animation here. Yeah, when I'm setting this up, there was like a few problems with the farthingale, like the hoops on the farthingale, so I had to kind of place everything, which was a bit of a drag. But yeah, this is pretty much the final thing with the textures on top that we're gonna bring into the animation. And the animation is just kind of a simple walking one, and the tip I have for animation is to get one. I get mine from Maximo. And when you're exporting your animation, just make sure you put the hands quite a ways away from the body. They have a slider there for how far away from the body the hands are. Especially with stuff like this, like you want to have it pretty far away from the body just so that it, like fabrics don't, like the limbs don't rub with the fabrics too much at the at the underarm and stuff like that, because that definitely can ruin an animation. So yeah, this is just a bit of the setup work. It's nothing too crazy, just making sure all the layers are sitting where they're supposed to be and just troubleshooting a few things. And as per close documentation, I think the best thing to do for animation is to actually have it at 8 particle distance, not at 5. Even though 5 obviously looks a lot better, I think 5 becomes a little bit unstable, so 8 is a pretty good one. And for the layers, just make sure everything is sitting how it's supposed to be at the beginning, and have everything as layer 0. If you have things layered differently, it really kind of messes with the animation. So the animations came out a lot better than I expected. I didn't have too much problems with like instability and stuff like that, and I'm not sure how long they took, just because whenever I started rendering an animation, I would just kind of leave my computer for a few hours and go eat or go to the gym or stuff like that. But I really like it, especially from the side. You can kind of see the bounce of the farthingale, and you can kind of see it move around. I think overall, perhaps the fabric of the petticoat and the stays was a bit too flowy. I feel like it should be a little stiffer, but overall I like it. And I like the way when I follow these kind of like historical ways of doing this, and the kind of like historical techniques, seeing the simulation afterwards, just because we probably will never get to see, unless we time travel, we'll never get to see how those things looked in real life. So it's nice to kind of see them, like a representation of them simulated, even though if it's only digitally. So that's pretty much this project wrapped up. If you want to see a different version of this, where I rendered with a different texture, go on my ArtStation. There will be a link in the description, and you can go check that out. And yeah, if you like the video, please like and subscribe and comment and do all the good YouTube stuff, and I'll see you for the next one.